Black Cat Lounge is sponsored by Beacon, a home for those who have a passion for filmmaking and the unusual. The Haunted Hiddensdale House. Those who walk there do not walk alone. Paraware, apparel for the action-seeking paranormal investigator. Dragonfly art and soul for all of your magical, metaphysical, and spiritual needs. Mystery Control, your go-to feed for science, magic, true crime, the paranormal, and so much more. Paraniagara, one of the top-rated destinations in Western New York. The Black Cat Lounge is part of the Paraflix Entertainment Network. Hey everybody, Tim Shaw here. Thank you so much for being a part of my life and being a part of my show. We've got a great episode for you tonight, and I've been waiting to be able to talk to our guest tonight because of the fact that you guys know how big of an influence the Victorian Age is on me. And I mean, just, you can take a look around me and, you can see that just as this is just a smaller collection. And it is something that has been a part of my life from time immemorial. From the first time that my great Uncle Gib, yes, my great Uncle Gib used to tell me about a soldier relative that actually had fought in the Civil War and at Gettysburg, blah, blah, a lot of stuff like that. And I've always been kind of cultivating an interest in it. So it's been so wonderful that I get a chance to go and pick the brain of someone who's really, it's a specialty of his, that he really enjoys it. He really understands it. And talking off air, I just love this guy already. This guy is great. And he comes, to be honest with you, I heard about him because a friend of mine actually sat in on one of his talks. And she says, you got to have this guy on your show. I know how you love Victorian Mourning, but also the Victorian Age. And that's what it's all about. All right, before we go on, listen, I want to welcome back one of our new sponsors, Dark Moon Press. And if you're looking for books that are interesting, a little offbeat, you're looking for something that may be a little darker, Dark Moon Press is the press for you. And as a matter of fact, they will be handling my latest book, Unusual and Scary Stories I Tell My Friends. But anyway, let's go and let's bring on someone. I mean, when I researched for his introduction, I was like, wow, this guy is accomplished, especially in this field. And you guys know that I'm in like these cemeteries and I'm reclaiming Victorian graves, here in the Western New York area. And so it's so great. It's spectacular. Anyway, tonight's guest is someone who I have a great deal of admiration for and respect. I really do. We both share a passion for this age and the knowledge of it. And the knowledge that this person possesses is astounding, and I marvel at it. So Adam is a sought-after presenter. He's a prolific author, and he's penned Games That Time Forgot, History's Haunted Headlines, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4. By the way, this is something that I love. I absolutely love the whole concept of that. Dear Santa Claus, The Rottenest Things on Earth, The Worst Act in Vaudeville with the Cherry Sisters. You know what? You guys all know that I love sideshows, and you guys all know that I love anything to do with that. And here in Western New York, we've had all these different little, like the Sutler Sisters and all that. I love that. So I can't wait to read that book. And you know what? Novelties That Time Forgot is another one of his books. Oh, and Once Upon a Halloween and the Victorian Historian's Book of Hidden Picture Puzzles. And I'm a sucker for those because whenever I can get a repro Victorian Age newspaper, I always kind of look for those because I do see them every so often. So please let everybody sit back, and all of you people out there with your smoking jackets on, enjoying your calabash pipe, enjoy our guest today, the absolutely fabulous Adam Shefts. Adam, thank you so much for coming on the air today. Oops, there we are. We have, oh, wow, what are we, looks like we're having there we, Adam, I was afraid there for a couple seconds. You know what? I don't know. You know what? StreamYard sometimes will develop a little hex when we start talking about like Victorian mourning things. So.
All right, well then we're in for a treat. We're in for some more. We're in for some more technical difficulties.
No, we should be good. We should be good. Now, Adam, first off, let me just ask you this because I love to ask all my guests that first come on the show. I love their backstories because a lot of people know me and they know that I've loved and I made it a mission to go on every single battlefield that my great-great-grandfather actually fought on. So I am just an aficionado of the time era. So what brought you into this? Why did you find that the Victorian age was just so fascinating?
It really is. Well, first off, thank you for having me. So glad to be here. But yeah, the Victorian era is fascinating, and when I was a child, I was always drawn to older things, older items. I remember instead of Matchbox cars, I would have little model cars of like Model Ts. Some of the earliest ones are even models of cars before then. I was always drawn to things that were much older than myself. As I aged, it's kind of funny in a way. My interest in history didn't grow with me. So as I aged, my interest in history kind of just stayed very simple. I remember my parents brought me to Gettysburg when I was in my teens, maybe, and I just had no interest in being there.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
I had no
Wow.
interest in it. My interest in history really started blossoming, I would say, when I was in my mid-20s. I don't know what happened. It just sort of grabbed me, and I went back to Gettysburg. Of course, I loved it that time, but it took quite a few years for me to really get to where I am in my passion for history. In fact, when I was in middle school and high school, I pretty much failed history almost every year. I had to beg my teachers to pass me with a D minus. So,
Wow.
so but
I
now,
am just blown away, Adam. I'm totally blown away by that because, you have this passion. Just we were talking off air. I mean, you have this aura about you that it's like, if I could get into a time machine and time trip back, I could live. I could blend right in. So I find this like fascinating.
yeah, and and once that history grabs you, once you become a history nerd, as I call myself, it doesn't let you go. It just
True.
and then you start researching and you go down rabbit holes and you find
Mm-hmm.
more interesting things. That's how I came across a lot of my ideas for my books, was just looking through old newspapers and coming across something that I had no idea about. I never heard about. I'm like, I need to research this further, and you go down all these rabbit holes, and it's so interesting. It's so fascinating,
Yeah.
as you know, being a history enthusiast yourself.
As and I thank you for giving me such a great compliment on my decor here.
I love it. I really do. I really do.
It's just sometimes you have to just sit down there and you have to really allow history to flow over you. And I think that when you become immersed in it, you see it through different eyes. And
Yes.
again, I mean, my father took me down to Gettysburg since I've been 9 years old. So he's always been, and I have my great great grandfather's belt buckle that's got a bullet in it and the whole thing. So I've really had more of a personal like touch to it, but yet it's amazing how you've been able to go and cultivate that into what you do now, into that passion. Now, let's talk about the Victorian age, Adam. We often talk about, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I am like the world's worst scholar. I'm dyslexic when it comes to numbers. But I mean, we're talking about the age of Queen Victoria, 1837 to like what, 1901. I think she
Yeah,
passed
yeah,
away, was it?
1901.
And let me ask you this: when we talk about the Victorian age, what was the fascination? Why did we here in the United States find that the culture and the traditions in Great Britain would go and would be so uh the best way I could describe it is so people would want this, people would
Yeah,
love this, people wanted to emulate it. I mean, let's think about it. We beat the British in the Revolutionary War. War of 1812 was sort of like a type of
mhm.
thing. There was no beachhead that was actually held on to in either side. So why do you think that the people of the United States were so interested in this era and going in and just emulating so much of what was going on over there?
I sometimes wonder that also, why we were so influenced by British culture. And if we didn't bring over culture from England, would we have gone that way anyway? Or would we in the United States have
Mm-hmm.
never really mirrored what was happening over in England? I mean, there was people. So I don't know. I have a few ideas of why that might be. So I know that if you look at any magazines from the 19th century, whether it's from England or here in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
people were fascinated with romance. They were fascinated with culture, with etiquette, um, and England had that. England had that, and we sort of adopted it as our norm here in this country. And it's one of those things I wonder, would we again even have that if we didn't copy that culture from England? Queen Victoria was an extremely popular presence over in
Mm-hmm.
England. She became very popular here in the United States as well. There were um, images, there were framed pictures you could purchase back in the day here in this country of Queen Victoria. You could hang in your house. Obviously, she wasn't the president of the United States, but she was Queen Victoria, and we admired her in this country. And
That to me, that's fascinating because I think about it, uh, going into so many uh, antebellum homes over the years, and I have seen uh, Queen Victoria lithos, and I've always been wondering why they would put that up. But if we start thinking about the southern states and the southern influence, I think they were very highly influenced by whatever was going on in England and in the islands, rather than the North was, I think, was a little bit slower bringing it in. But once it set in, it set in. Let me ask you this: do you think it had anything to do with the industrial age? Do you think, because let's face it, England was heads and tails over all of us when it came to, and they basically ruled the world. I mean, they were a global, they had global domination. Do you think that it was a factor in that, where it was just like, okay, let's emulate their culture in order to perhaps be influenced enough to build up our own industry?
absolutely, absolutely, England at the time was a very powerful nation, and we wanted power as well. So we copied what was already powerful and adopted it.
Makes sense. It makes sense. Now, something else that the age always fascinated me by was the fact that it was something where we, in our minds, now, and we're looking back 20, whatever we are, whatever age, because the show will be repeated, so we don't put a year on this one, but let's face it, uh, we always think about that idyllic form of Victoriana, where it is all the upper class.
Hmm. Hmm.
Let me ask you this. Was there a lot of the culture that had a trickle down effect? And I think that, if from what I understand and reading some diaries, the middle class had some, but what about the poorest classes? Were they also influenced as well by some of the things that may have been going on in England?
Mm, not so much visually. So what I'm trying to say is
Hmm.
the upper class and the middle class, they had the financial means to copy
Right.
what England had. The lower class didn't have that financial. They didn't have those financial means. So I mean, you could say that the lower class, yes, mirrored what was in lower class England at the time.
Hmm.
Uh, just the way that they decorated their homes, the way that they prepared meals. They worked with what they had, and lower class, copied from lower class. And hopefully they elevated eventually,
Hmm.
but I think every class has copied from the same class over in England.
Now, I'd like to ask you now. What see everybody doesn't real a lot of people don't realize is that we work in a balance, and life is a balance. And we see so much of the good that went into this, but there was a lot of poverty. There was a lot of like workhouses and that sort of thing during that time. How widespread was that? Was that like debtors' prisons, and that was that really widespread back at during that time period?
Well, there was a book published in, I want to say, the 1890s. I don't know off the top of my head. It was called How the Other Half Lives. And
Yes, yes.
the upper class and the middle class in the United States, they didn't know about the lower class. Lower class was kind of the black mark of the country, I guess you can call it. And so when this photographer took these pictures of these people living in poverty, all crammed in these small apartments that can maybe hold comfortably, you know a small family, but now you have like 20 people jammed into it.
Right,
Um, when
right.
that book came out, when that book was published, people were shocked. They had no idea this was going on in the United States because all that was presented was wealth and beauty in magazines and reported or spoken about in books. Um,
Hmm.
no one ever mentioned the lower class because it was unsightly. There was actually a law, which is still in books today. You can look it up. It's called the Ugly Law. Have you ever heard of it?
No,
Okay,
wow.
okay, the Ugly Law. The Ugly Law began, I believe it was 1865, when it started in San Francisco when soldiers from the Civil War returned home and they were missing limbs, or they needed wheelchairs now to get around. When they were seen in public, this disturbed people. People weren't used to seeing several people with missing limbs, walking with a limp, needing a wheelchair, or maybe possibly even being disfigured.
Hmm.
This disturbed people, and there were enough reports or enough complaints about seeing these people on the streets that there was a law passed in
Wow.
1865 called the Ugly Law, which stated basically if you saw someone on the street who bothered you, who was unsightly for any reason, it could have been just the way they were born. Um, that person could potentially be fined and arrested for being seen in public.
That's amazing. I did
And
not know that.
and the ugly law carried over across the country. So I know Pennsylvania, the law was enacted throughout the entire state, I believe in 1895. It's still in the books today. New York, certain areas of New York. I don't know if you're in Buffalo, right?
Right.
I don't know if Buffalo has it. They may have the law. I don't know. But I know certain parts of New York also enacted it in the
Wow.
1890s. And they're actually, the last time it was used was in I want to say 1974. Um, in Utah, there was a homeless man on the street who had a drug addiction. So he had all these marks on his arms.
Hmm.
Somebody somebody called the police and reported him, and the police officer came and arrested him under the ugly law because he was
Amazing.
homeless and he had scars all over him from his drug abuse. Um, During the court case, the judge said that he can't he has to let this man go because what is considered attractive is subjective. So what's unattractive to one person may not be to another, and so how could you withhold or how could you keep this law
Amazing.
upheld? But there is if I mean some states didn't enact it; they knew it was wrong. But many states did enact the ugly law, and it's still on the books today.
That's wild. That's wild. You know, because I do know by studying Civil War veteran pensions that they did have a lot of problems getting them because once the war was over, they were useless. They were a burden. And it makes sense that they would have a law like this to hide
Mhm.
all of these people who no longer were able to work in a major capacity, a normal capacity, as your regular citizens. And well, as you know, and Adam, I'm sure you've found it. Those in the upper class always look down at
Yes,
anybody that may be different or in that lower class, and that's
yes,
just
and
and that's
that's
an
why
unfortunate thing.
yeah, and that's why people didn't know that there was this whole other culture of lower class people living in poverty until this
Wow,
book, How the Other Half
amazing!
Lives, came
I've
out.
heard of the book. Yeah,
Yeah, and
that's
then
amazing.
yeah, and then people realize, oh wow, there's other people here who are in much worse position than we are. We need to help them. That's when these organizations started popping up to help people who needed that assistance.
Amazing, amazing. Let's switch gears. Excuse me, a little bit. Now, during this time period, you had the growth of some major religions in the United States, and I mean, I'm sure you know that that I was brought up Roman Catholic and spiritualist, and my father's family can trace it back to the 1880s, which is always something that's really neat. Uh, and I grew up learning about Fox sisters and Andrew Jackson Davis and Swedenborg and that sort of thing. Why do you think that? Because up until the Civil War, spiritualism almost was wiped out.
Mhm.
During the Civil War and afterwards, it just took off. It's the golden
Yes.
age. Why do you think that is? Do you think it was because of the innovations? Do you think as privations of the people back home? Why do you think that these things just kind of just became almost developed a life of their own?
Yeah. So in my research for my History's Haunted Headlines books, I actually didn't find much material during the Civil War era, and that's because there was so much death and devastation. Uh, Meeting people's eyes. They would open
Right,
their door. There's the newspaper. It's just death on the front page.
right,
So there was no clamoring for ghost stories when there was already so much death occurring. Yes, the Fox sisters did get the modern spiritualism ball rolling when they began in the 1840s. But after the Civil War, you had okay. So let me back up a little bit.
hmm
Prior to the Civil War, you had what was called the Good Death, and
yes,
that is dying at home, surrounded by your loved ones, who all had a chance to say goodbye, and that was the good death. In the Civil War, you died on a battlefield. You didn't get a chance to have a
hmm
good death. You didn't get a chance to say goodbye to your loved ones. Your loved ones didn't get a chance to say goodbye to you. You died where you fell. Um, the good death was no longer a thing. And this is when spiritualism really started picking up, especially in terms of mediumship, because now you have all these families who have lost loved ones on the battlefield. They want to know that they are okay on the other side. So they're hiring these mediums, and not all of them were legitimate. Some were, but there were a lot of
Oh,
fraudsters out there.
Adam, I always when I teach, if I'm up in the pulpit or if I'm teaching a class, I always say there's two ages of spiritualism: the golden age of spiritualism, and the golden age of spiritualist fraud.
Yes,
So
yes,
you have to take the good with the bad.
yes. There was more, I would say, more fraud during that time. But
Yes.
yeah, but so people would have mediums over to their homes, And this, to try and reach their loved one who had passed over. And of course, the medium would charge them for it
Yep.
and tell them basically what they want to hear. Um, Spiritualism, or I'm sorry, these yeah, both spiritualism and these seances became such a popular thing that they became basically an evening's entertainment in
Yes.
countries across America. Um, it became such a popular thing that by the 1870s, spiritualism became an unofficial religion. Somebody could ask you, "What's your religion?" You could say, "I'm a spiritualist," because
Yes.
you were that involved in it, that's what you practiced. You practiced spiritualism, the speaking of others who have passed on. And
Now, I
oh
mean, we are talking about an age after, especially after the war, because again, so many people. If anybody that goes wandering graveyards will see cenopaths. They will see these stones that are memorials. They're not, the person is not buried there. They are a memorial to that person. And to me, that's always been sad. But then we also see this fraud. The fraud is amazing because I always marveled at the work. Well, when I was coming up the ranks and we had to learn Lyceum, which is the spiritualist Sunday school, we had all these photos that were like unbelievable, spirit photos, and we had ectoplasmic photos,
mhm.
and most of them were made by William Mumler,
Yes,
who was a fraud. And this is
yes.
this is this is what they used to look like
And
right there.
unfortunately, when Mumler passed away, he destroyed all his material. So
Yep.
we don't know how he did this. He claims it was authentic, but we don't know how he actually created these images.
Well, down in Gettysburg, actually, unfortunately, the house, the location burned was the Victorian Photo Gallery, photo studio, and they produced this one of me as a spirit coming back. And I had him on the show, and we were talking about it, and he has an idea of how they did it, but nobody really knows.
Yeah,
Nobody really knows, and that to me is still fascinating.
it
But I mean,
is.
it's because people needed that, and people needed that reinsurance, and that to me it's a sad commentary, but it is a huge commentary. And again, uh, yourself when you start looking at many of the religions, and so many are dour, and then you're looking at religions that give hope, and that's what it is.
Mm.
But I think it's phenomenal that you are able to go and look into all this. Now let's talk a little bit about, we start talking about, after the Civil War, Victorian ghost stories. I mean, I'm fascinated. I have a couple books here that I'm just fascinated. I like to read them like once a year because they are stories that you would tell. Now, why ghost stories of all the different stories? I know that, okay, it's a long winter, and and everybody, there was no internet and no cell phones, and no TV. Why do you think that people would choose a ghost story rather than something that may have been a little bit more uplifting? We all know that people did read the Bible and that sort of stuff and did that kind of Bible study, but still, ghost stories for some reason always comes to the forefront.
Yeah. Well, ghosts or spirits are to become a spirit. There's often some kind of tragic story involved, and there's always romance and tragedy. And
Right.
people, I think, are drawn to that romance in that tragic moment. Saying goodbye to a loved one. Some of these spirits may, they're wandering, right? A lot of these ghost stories, wandering spirits looking for their
Mhm.
significant other who they never had a chance to say goodbye to, or someone who got jilted at the altar, and now they're roaming around forever with a broken heart. There's some kind of romance in tragic moments, and I think that's what we are really drawn to. And and and
I
and,
think
and
we are, and I think it's an innate, they're more, and morality plays. I mean, they really basically are morality tales, and to go and you know try to live a better life than the person that we're talking about, which is always good. I have a question here from my good friend Jason. Do you think that at the beginning of the Civil War, when people would go watch the battles and have picnics, we're probably referencing First Bull Run, uh, that they thought this is what the English would do, and just wanted to do it do what they thought was deemed popular? That's kind of a neat
That's
question.
yeah,
I never
that's a,
thought about.
that is a very good question. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. Um, it could be, or it could just be morbid curiosity. That Americans wanted to watch a battle that they had only read about in newspapers throughout time. Now they can actually go see it. But who knows? I don't know. That's a really good question.
When, when we think about it, it's probably morbid curiosity because we start looking at the executions at that time and that predate the 1860s, and then they after the 1860s, and you do see that there is a lot of people that will go and fill the streets and travel for days. And we
Yeah.
see like the Tiber tree in England. That was a place that was really a popular place where they just took care of executions. And of course, I mean, you look at even at predated with the French Revolution and the guillotine. That again, that pulled in crowds. So we don't know, but that's actually something to think about.
I was just
Now,
gonna say that. I was just gonna say that same thing.
it's I love when people go and throw a question and you kind of go, we'll have to go and think about an answer for that one. Now, when we talk about this age, it's something that to me really is like they had so many rules and regulations and the way that you had to conduct yourself,
Mhm.
and it did trickle. And I have read uh some people from the lower middle class, shopkeepers and apprentices that did read and write, that they wouldn't do something because uh, it would break tradition.
You want
Or,
to hear? Oh, sorry.
we talk about mourning, where we have specific ways of doing it. Well, do you think that uh, this was almost like a survival mechanism, or do you think it was just fad? Do you think it's like back in the, and I'll predate you and I'll date myself, back in the 60s we all wore bell bottom jeans. So do you think it's just something that was more of a fad?
It could be a fad. It could be a fear of being judged, fear of being looked at as not up to par with what is considered
Hmm.
normal, or what is considered what's the word I'm looking for? Just what's considered etiquette, proper etiquette of
Yeah,
the time. You want to hear something crazy though? So
I think.
speaking of etiquette, I have this book from I believe it's 1893, and it's called Etiquette at Home and Abroad. And I can't believe some of the things that
Wow.
were in there, and some of the things that women especially had to uphold themselves to, which is crazy. One of the things I saw was if a couple is walking down the street and happen to be passing by a store window, if the woman wants to window shop, it's not proper etiquette to turn your head and look in the window. You have to stop, turn your whole body, and look in the window that way. You can't turn your head to
Wow.
look because it's not considered proper etiquette while walking on a sidewalk or on a street. I thought that was insane. I thought that was so bizarre. That's the kind of stuff I love. That's the kind of history I love coming across. The weird, the strange, just
Is this
and
is this
that's
something, it's kind of funny because I start thinking about uh you know uh, Queen Elizabeth and her life, and we start looking at Charles and King Charles now, and you start looking about how they were brought up and how they were instilled in order to, this is regal, this is the way you do things. And even Charles, when he was sent to that private school, they instilled so much into him, and it was almost as if it became stifling. Do you think there was a lot of pushing back by some of the masses?
um there has been. If you I've come across numerous newspaper articles that talk about someone. There's okay, so there's a lot of articles and newspapers that show you that not everyone was high standard as is depicted often in literature from that era or
Hmm.
imagery. There was a lot of basically people haven't changed. People have never changed. They've always been the same. And so you have a lot of people that have I've come across sons who have killed their fathers because they didn't want to adhere to the father's rules of etiquette.
Hmm.
Um, and very similar stories to that. It just goes to show that yeah, I think the Victorian era is romanticized greatly, but people really have not changed. They never have, and you have people in high society today,
Hmm.
who hold themselves differently. Look at country clubs. There's rules for country clubs where you have to wear certain types of pants. You have to wear ties. You can't just wear jeans and a t-shirt. So they hold themselves to a higher standard, and people have never been different. It's,
That's amazing. When you think about it, you hit the nail right on the head. I think innately we're all the same, regardless of the rules in which we have to live. And I really think that. Now, you know what? Let's talk about some of the things that were considered proper. And I know that you have uh, a couple little display pieces that you want to share with everybody, and it's great because I was just telling you off the air, I made one of these by myself a long
yes.
time ago. So I was so thrilled when you said I have one of these. So please let everybody see that.
Okay, I'm gonna hold it up. Hopefully, I can get it in the screen.
Oh, you got it.
Got it. Okay. So this type of candle holder dates back to the 1600s. And if you come to Gettysburg, if you eat at the Dobbin House Tavern, they have these
Yeah.
candles on every
Yep.
table there. Um, but this is in the 19th century. This became known as the courting candle because it was used by the head of the household, which was the husband slash father, as a timer for suitors to come over and visit his daughter. So with the courting candle, the top spiral is the timer itself. When the candle burns down to the top spiral, it's time for that suitor to leave. The visit is over. So, for the sake of this demonstration, let's say I'm a father with an adult daughter living with me, and she's having a suitor come over to visit. And for whatever reason, I'm not very fond of this young man. I don't think he's right for my daughter. I don't approve of him courting my daughter, let alone spending a lot of time in my house. Keep in mind, the top spiral is a timer itself. I'm going to lower this candle to a very low spiral.
Isn't that great?
And from the top spiral to the top of the candle, that is how much time that suitor has to visit my daughter. That's not a lot of time. Now, let's say my daughter's having a suitor over who I do like. I approve of him. I think he's good for her. I'm going to raise this candle to a higher spiral. And now, look how much time that suitor has to visit. It's a lot more than the last guy. Now, as head of the household, I can extinguish the candle at any time if I feel this visit needs to end early, or if the visit is going well and the candle is naturally extinguished, I can replace it with another, light it, and again, when it burns down to that top spiral, it's time for that suitor to leave. The visit is over. And that is how millions of families across the country used the courting candle throughout the 19th century.
That's great. Well, isn't that almost akin to the brothel matches and the brothel candles of that time
Similar,
period?
I guess, I suppose so. I suppose so.
Not that
Um,
listen, Adam. Not that I know a lot about about that subject. Let's just clear that up right now. But I've seen those, and I've seen some examples from out west. So it would be post Victorian, but a lot of the things that of the Victorian age carried on. What else do you? I know you have I know you have something else to show us.
yeah, so in the Victorian era, games were a huge part of social life in the 19th century. They were played
Hmm.
during holidays, especially during Halloween and Christmas. Those are the big game holidays. Um, and one of the games which became popular in the mid to late 19th century was called Apple and Candle. And I have here, it's an apple. I don't know if you can see the candle sticking out the side of it right there.
Yes,
And
yes.
okay, so what people would do is they would tie a string around the stem and hang the apple from a light fixture. And then what they would do is they would light the candle and they would push and spin the apple. So it wasn't just swinging, but also rotating rapidly. And the object of this game is for everyone to make a circle around the apple and try to catch it in their mouth without getting burned by the candle. And as you can imagine, this was not the safest game played. It
No.
was not uncommon for someone to miss the apple, instead bite the candle, burning their mouth, burning their face, lighting their hair on fire, or whatever else may occur with playing with fire. This game appeared in game books of the 19th century, but there were
Wow.
so many injuries playing apple and candle that when this game was mentioned in game books of the early 20th century, it was then suggested to replace the candle with a packet of flour. So instead of potentially biting and burning yourself on a candle, now you can be hit in the face with a packet of flour, potentially covered in it, depending on how many times you're hit. So a bit safer, but a bit messier as well. But yeah, Apple and Candle was a popular game up through the late 19th century. It kind of died out in the early 20th century, I think, because people didn't like being burned, didn't like their tablecloths catching fire, whatever else may occur with that. But yeah, this was a popular game. Victorians loved their fire. They loved playing with
Yeah.
fire. There was another game called Snapdragon. If you've ever heard of that, Snapdragon dates back centuries. It was actually mentioned by Shakespeare in several of his plays. But the
Hmm.
way that game worked was a bowl was filled with brandy, and then raisins were dropped into the bowl, which sank to the bottom, and the brandy was then lit on fire. So and the lights were extinguished in the room, so the only light source was provided by this flaming bowl of brandy. The object of the game is for everyone to take turns sticking their hand quickly into the flaming bowl of brandy, plucking out a raisin, and then eating it as fast as possible. Whoever was burned the least amount of times while eating the most amount of raisins won the game. If that makes any sense. If that makes any sense. There were a lot of injuries. There were a lot of
Hmm.
fires. People's curtains were known to catch on fire. The flames would just kind of jump out, and you had house fires. So this game also died out by the early 20th century. But there were all kinds of superstitions. I mean, there were some crazy superstitions I could get into.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have time to, but there were games associated with it.
Oh, yeah.
And the games, of course, also involved fire or candles or some kind of flame. So I can give you an example of one. Um,
Sure.
so
Absolutely. Please.
yeah, so a game that was popular uh, between Christmas and New Year's. This was played as a superstition for luck for the following year. So if you
Hmm.
had a hallway or a room that was long enough to line up 12 candles, about maybe 2 feet apart, each candle represented a month of the following year. If you didn't have the space to line candles, you would just line them in like a horseshoe pattern. If you had the space for that. So one by one, well, actually, all candles were lit. All the candles were lit. One by one, each person in the party had to jump over each candle. So jumping over the first candle represented January, second, February, third, March, and so on. If jumping over one of those candles extinguished the flame, that meant that month of that following year to come was going to be unfortunate for that person, and they can mentally prepare themselves for that unfortunate month. If they jumped over a candle and did not extinguish the flame, then that month would be a lucky one for that individual. And so that was a popular game also that was played.
That's great. Oh my God. Have you ever played Mumbly Peg?
I never heard of that.
Mumbly Peg is an old Appalachian game. It predates the Civil War. It's where you take a knife, you take a little piece, a little dowel, stick the dowel lightly in the wood or in the ground, and toss the knife up in the air so that it comes down flat, meaning it sticks up.
Okay.
When it sticks up, you can go and just tap the peg in, and you keep doing that until when you're playing you miss and the knife will and land flat. You have to get on your hands and knees with your teeth and pull out the peg, and that's that you lose because that's the penalty. We have to pull it out. But yeah,
I've
that's something
never
I
heard of it.
remember. That I remember some old timers teaching me that down in we were someplace in Virginia, and they were like, my grandfather, my great great grandfather played this game, so it's called Mumbly Peg. I'm sure it's got a couple other names to it,
Yeah, I'll have
but
to look that up. I never heard of that.
yeah, that's something that was, I guess, was very very common. Now, do you think, is there anything like any traditions whether they be mourning traditions or they be regular traditions or Christmas traditions, that still are enacted today in some way, shape, or form.
To a degree, I would say yes. For instance, there were a lot of superstitions involving death back in
Hmm.
the day. I mean, there was a high mortality rate, so death was very much a superstitious topic. So, for instance, something that might be done today is when someone passes away, all the mirrors are covered
Hmm.
because that if the mirrors are covered, the person who passed can't beckon you, or you won't be next. I've also heard recently that there are some people when someone passes away, they are taken out. I believe it was head first rather than feet first, for the same reasons that the person doesn't rise up and beckon you to follow them. Uh,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
it's the
yes.
afterlife. But there were some really bizarre ones. There were some really bizarre beliefs. Like, for instance, if a firefly got into your home, it meant somebody would soon die. Um, if a sparrow, this is a specific one, if a sparrow flew in through an open window and landed on a piano, someone in the home would die. And I'm thinking, how often did that happen? um,
But I mean, it's amazing because every so often I'll run into someone who talks about that, talks about traditions, and one of the big traditions, and I don't know if it's a European tradition that was brought here to the United States through many of the Slavic communities, but somebody passes away, you immediately open the window. And at first, I thought it was to keep the room cool and that, but they believe in order to let the spirit be able to go and leave the body and leave the location so it's not trapped. And I I've witnessed it here locally in modern times. So a lot of times these things are really left over, and people don't really realize it. Or I'm just trying to think. Oh, one of the things that I always equate were the invitations, the wake or funeral
mhm,
invitations. That was always something that was interested me. But yet now, when you go to a wake here, they give you little what they call mass cards. So
yes.
I often wonder if that was the same thing. Why was it so important to be invited to a funeral, to be formally invited and have to have that invitation?
It was considered proper etiquette, first of all,
Hmm.
to have these invitations to send out. But it was a formal way of saying goodbye. I mean, especially
Hmm.
especially with photography, for instance. So as far as funerals go, yeah, it's well, some people did dress for funerals,
Hmm.
um, to be seen.
True. No, it's
They
true. It's the same as today. Yes.
Yeah. Of course, you want to pay your respects. You want to say goodbye to someone for the last time. But also, a lot of people did wear, even though they were black, attire. They were very elegant black attire. It was a time to be seen. So it kind
Hmm.
of some people ended up making funerals about themselves in that regard. But also with um, postmortem photography was huge back
Yes.
then.
Yes.
And it was very expensive to get a photograph taken. If you wanted to get a professional photo taken at a studio, that could be expensive. Not everybody could
Mhm.
afford that. And those who
Excuse me.
could maybe only afford one in a lifetime. And they didn't want that photo representing them. I should mention this. They didn't want that photo representing them as a fool or a drunk. Now, let me backtrack a little on that. So, um, have you ever noticed that people in photographs? I'm sorry if I'm jumping all over the place. I have
No, it's
so
all right.
much
No,
I have
no,
so
no,
much
no,
in
no.
mind trying to get out in the time that we have. But so have you seen photographs of the 19th century? Nobody smiles. No one
Hmm.
smiles. And there are two theories as to why that is. The first theory is because it took so long for a photo to be taken, people couldn't hold a smile for that long. But by the 1850s, a picture could be taken within 10 seconds. So although 10 seconds may seem like a bit of a lengthy time to hold a smile, it wasn't impossible. So
Right.
that theory really doesn't hold weight. The second theory is because due to lack of dental hygiene, people didn't have the greatest teeth and therefore
Oh,
didn't
that's
want them
true.
seen in photos.
I never
But you
kind of
know what?
thought about
In
that.
in my
Yeah.
research, I could not find anything about that. So I don't think that theory holds weight either. I think I believe it dates. I think the reason why people don't smile in photos dates back to the 18th century, when prior to photographic portraits, portraits were painted, and those most often appearing in painted portraits smiling were fools and drunks. And by fools, I mean like, clowns or jesters,
Hmm.
or just people who were considered, for lack of a better, or actually for the term of the time, idiotic,
Yes.
or
Yes.
imbeciles, as they would call people back then. Those
Adam,
were
we're running out of time. Tell everybody, first of all, it's so important. Tell everybody where they can buy your books. And I promise you, and I told you off the air that I will be buying some of your books because I love this. It's so fascinating. But also where you're going to be appearing soon.
Yeah, so I'm going to be doing whoever's going to the New Jersey Para Unity in November.
Mhm.
I'll be a vendor there. The Hollow Paracon and Film Fest coming up, I believe, next month, August 22nd. Um, Stockton University, New Jersey. I'll be a vendor there as well. I am currently scheduling events at libraries, historical societies, I think possibly some country clubs. So I'm working on that right now. But right now, my events are pretty much just book signing events. I do
Great.
an hour long program of just covering all kinds of the strangest information to come out of the Victorian era.
Amazing.
It's complete with short stories, personal demonstrate or live demonstrations, I should say, some in which I get the audience involved. Um, Rare film and audio clips, and it's a lot of fun. I'm also going to be working on a paranormal history program.
Fantastic. I can't wait.
So I'm going to be starting that one soon as well, and hopefully be able to offer that by maybe October. Be able to offer
Fantastic.
that. So yeah, so
I have to tell you, this was one of the quickest hours that I've ever had because I just find it so fascinating. And you are such a great storyteller, and you've got such a handle on so much of this time era. And I think it's just amazing. So, Adam, I want to thank you so much. I got one question. For you. Are you
yes,
ready? Are you ready
yes.
for this one? It's a hard question. I only do this for guests that I really like. And we got about 3 minutes at the end of it all. And we all know that the Victorian age, they had all your gravestones and all your markers were very grandiose. What would your epitaph be?
Oh boy, I
It's a
don't have
hard
enough
one,
time.
but it's I think
Yeah.
it's important.
Oh wow. um, that is a good one. I don't know. Um, Insert epitaph here. I don't know, but
Mine will be, yeah, he's an okay guy.
he's
That's
okay.
he's an okay guy.
I have no, that's what, if I had time to think about that, I would have had something much better to say. But
That's all right.
but to just briefly get to your question before, my books are available on the victorianhistorian.com or just victorianhistorian.com. It both leads to the same site. And I have links to all my books directly to the Amazon listing. So they're all available through Amazon. And of course, I have all of my events listed on the site as well. And I have all my books available during those book signings that you'll see on the website. So if you happen to come out to any of them, I'll be glad to personalize and sign it for you. But that's where you can find all the information on the victorianhistorian.com or just victorianhistorian.com.
Phenomenal. Adam, stay on the line so I can thank you properly. And
Sure.
really, I absolutely love this show. Thank you
It
so
was a
much.
pleasure. It was a
And
pleasure.
really, and thank you so much for taking the time because I know it's I know you've been busy. So I'll be right back. Thank
Of
you
course.
again. This was great.
My pleasure.
Guys, amazing. You know what, people, in order to understand the present, we must look back into the past. And I'm a very firm believer that we need to be able to go and open up our minds. Just because it didn't happen after the Cold War doesn't mean that we shouldn't take the time to understand it and learn it and really appreciate those that have gone before us. And many of you guys know I'm a volunteer up at Concordia Cemetery, and I reclaim many of the Victorian and post-Victorian stones that have been either lost, dropped, or whatever. We find them and we remount them. So I think it's something that is important to me to do in order to give back to the time period and the age. So guys, think about how you can do that, and think about being able to go and buy some of Adam's books, because he's got a I love the concept. I love the concepts of the headlines. So anyway, take care, guys. I will see you next week. A lot of blessings. Be kind. And remember, the Black Cat Lounge, it's where the elite meet, next to the dumpster transfer station, guys. You know what? We always don't get great shows like this. Take care. Ciao, babies. Bye-bye. Really